In an alternate reality where Peter Parker never existed, Spider-Man's mask is discovered abandoned in the streets of New York City. A mystery begins to unravel. Who wore the mask, and why does the city feel the absence of its beloved hero? The government steps in, sending elite soldiers to investigate the strange occurrence. But the deeper they dig, the more they uncover a web of secrets that threatens not only their world but the fabric of time itself. Unbeknownst to them, a war is brewing, not just between nations, but between reality and the multiverse. The soldiers must race against time, uncovering the truth about Spider-Man's disappearance while facing a greater threat than they ever imagined. As they get closer, they realize they may have uncovered something far more dangerous than they anticipated. It was an ordinary morning in New York City when the discovery was made, but the moment would shake the city to its core. A small group of homeless people stumbled upon an old worn Spider-Man mask lying on the cold concrete of an alley. At first, they thought it was a prank, something left behind by someone playing dress-up or a leftover Halloween costume. But as they examined it, they realized it wasn't just any mask. It was the real deal, the iconic red and blue webbed faceplate that had once been the symbol of New York's greatest hero. Yet, there was something eerily out of place. There was no bloodstain, no sign of a struggle, just the mask left alone. The find quickly spread across the city, and the mystery deepened. How could Spider-Man's mask appear in the middle of the city when Spider-Man himself had vanished years ago? He had disappeared without a trace, leaving only questions in his wake. Rumors began circulating about Peter Parker, the young man behind the mask, but none of it made sense. No one knew who Peter Parker was. In this reality, Peter had never been born. And yet, the mask persisted. The city was gripped by a wave of confusion, and as the mask changed hands, it eventually came to the attention of the government. The military saw it as a potential national security threat. If Spider-Man's mask was real, then perhaps the man behind it was real too. And if that was the case, what other secrets might be hiding beneath the surface of the world they thought they knew? A special task force was created to investigate the mask's origin, with orders to bring in any and all information related to Spider-Man. The team was an elite group of soldiers, assembled for this mysterious mission, each chosen for their skills and expertise in covert operations. But as they began their investigation, they soon realized that the mask was more than just an artifact. It was the key to something much larger. The first clue came from the mask itself. Beneath the fabric, a faint engraving appeared. "To those who seek the truth, beware. The past may not be what you remember." This cryptic message set the stage for what would become a journey far beyond what they could have imagined. As they dug deeper, the soldiers realized that uncovering the truth about Spider-Man's disappearance might lead them into a battle that could change their world, and every other reality, forever. The military quickly took control of the investigation, assembling a covert task force of elite soldiers to track down the origins of Spider-Man's mask and the mysterious absence of Peter Parker. This unit, known as Omega Squad, was composed of some of the most skilled operatives in the armed forces, specialists in intelligence, tech, and combat. Led by Major Elias Carter, a no-nonsense officer with a reputation for solving the toughest cases, the squad was tasked with uncovering what the city had overlooked for years: the truth about Spider-Man. As the team dug into the mask's origins, they quickly discovered that the timeline of their reality was off. Every lead they followed pointed to an unsettling truth. Peter Parker never existed in this world. There were no birth records, no school files, no traces of his life, nothing. Despite Spider-Man's global legacy, this version of New York City had never seen the hero that the world had come to admire. Major Carter's team, comprised of diverse experts, began looking deeper into the city's records, consulting historians, and reviewing old newspapers. Their investigation revealed a troubling fact: the world had been altered, and no one seemed to remember how or when it happened. There were no explanations as to why Peter Parker was missing from history, but Spider-Man's mask suggested something far more complex. Perhaps the entire concept of their reality had been manipulated. The soldiers discovered encrypted files buried deep within the city's vast archives, files that seemed to have been intentionally hidden. One file stood out, a series of redacted documents, all of which hinted at a covert government operation that had been monitoring anomalies in time and space. It referred to a Project Spider, a mysterious initiative that appeared to have had ties to the superhero's legacy, though the records were too fragmented to make sense of. As the soldiers continued to dig, strange things started happening. They uncovered irregularities in their own memories, tiny moments that didn't line up with the past they remembered. Major Carter had a personal connection to the case, his own memories of Spider-Man's past blurring into something unfamiliar. It was clear that they were dealing with something beyond mere conspiracy. This was an altered reality. The task force soon found themselves at the center of a dangerous web of secrets, unaware that their investigation would soon lead them into a deadly conflict. Forces more powerful than they could imagine were already watching them, and the soldiers quickly realized that they were not just searching for answers, they were being hunted. The line between friend and foe began to blur, and the mission became more than just about uncovering the past. It was about survival. The deeper Omega Squad dug into the mystery of Spider-Man's mask, the more they realized they were not the only ones interested in its secrets. What began as an investigation into a strange, inexplicable discovery had escalated into a full-blown war, one fought in the shadows, between factions with vastly different agendas. It started with a quiet encounter. Late one night, as Major Carter and his team were combing through the remains of a government facility that had been connected to Project Spider, they encountered the first signs of resistance. At first, it was just a few quiet whispers in the air, the feeling of being watched. But then, without warning, gunfire rang out, and their operation turned into a firefight with an unseen enemy. The soldiers fought back fiercely, but their attackers were no ordinary soldiers. They were members of a clandestine organization, known only as the Syndicate. This shadow group had been operating in the background for years, manipulating global events and controlling information. They had been monitoring the anomaly surrounding Spider-Man for as long as it had existed. The Syndicate, it seemed, was not interested in revealing the truth of Spider-Man's legacy but in ensuring it remained buried forever. As Omega Squad fought off their attackers, they realized that the Syndicate knew about the altered reality. The Syndicate's operatives seemed to have access to information that Omega Squad could not yet understand. Timelines, alternate realities, and the manipulation of history itself. The soldiers were outmatched, but they were relentless. Major Carter's leadership, combined with the squad's resourcefulness, kept them alive. Yet, it was clear this was no longer just a mission to uncover secrets. It had become a war for control over reality itself. The Syndicate had far-reaching influence, and their next move was swift. Within hours, cities across the world were thrown into chaos as strange, seemingly random events occurred. Attacks on key government facilities, sudden disappearances, and cryptic messages sent to world leaders all pointed to a coordinated effort to prevent the truth from getting out. The Syndicate was using their knowledge of alternate realities and time manipulation to destabilize entire governments, and Omega Squad was caught in the middle. Major Carter knew their mission was more urgent than ever. The mask, now in their possession, was more than just a symbol of a forgotten hero. It was a key to understanding the war being fought across multiple dimensions. But as they continued their fight against the Syndicate, they began to question whether they were fighting to save their reality, or whether they were being drawn into a war that could destroy them all. The lines between friend and enemy blurred. Allies turned out to be enemies, and enemies became strange allies. In the chaos, Omega Squad realized that the fate of not just their world, but countless others, depended on what happened next. The war for truth had begun, and the soldiers were right in the middle of it. But as they soon discovered, this was no ordinary war. It was a war for reality itself. The war between Omega Squad and the Syndicate raged on, but the conflict was beginning to shift in terrifying and unpredictable ways. As Major Carter's team pushed forward, the lines between their reality and other dimensions began to blur. What once seemed like a straightforward mission to uncover the origins of Spider-Man's mask had spiraled into something far more complex and dangerous, an unraveling of the very fabric of reality itself. It all began when they discovered a hidden chamber deep within a secure government facility, one that had been buried for decades. Inside, they found a series of strange, glowing artifacts. At the center of the room was a device unlike anything they had ever seen, a machine that seemed to hum with an unnatural energy. The soldiers quickly realized that the device was not of earthly origin. It was a dimensional rift generator, an apparatus designed to open doorways between universes, and it was connected to the mask. In their haste to understand the device, the soldiers inadvertently activated it. The room was filled with a blinding light, and the ground beneath them shook. As the light faded, they found themselves facing something they hadn't anticipated: other versions of Spider-Man. But these weren't just alternate versions from different universes, they were different iterations of the same hero, each shaped by an entirely different reality. There was a Spider-Man who had failed his city, becoming a ruthless vigilante. Another who had embraced his role as a villain, using his powers to conquer rather than protect. And then there was a version who had never even donned the mask, but whose life had been shaped by the same tragedies that led Peter Parker to become Spider-Man. Each version of Spider-Man held different memories, different motives, and different versions of reality. They had all crossed through the rift and entered Omega Squad's world, unintentionally triggering a cascade of instability across the multiverse. Reality began to fracture. Streets began to shift and warp. The world around the soldiers was becoming unrecognizable. Time itself seemed to bend, with moments from the past bleeding into the present. One moment, they were fighting in a government building. The next, they found themselves back in the midst of an old battle they'd fought months ago, only now with different people, different outcomes. The soldiers were no longer sure whether the world they were living in was the one they remembered. Amid the chaos, they realized that the Syndicate had been planning for this very scenario. They had been manipulating the multiverse, knowing that if they could fracture reality, they could control it. The Syndicate's true goal wasn't just to prevent the truth from being uncovered. It was to harness the power of the rift and rewrite reality itself, molding the world into whatever suited their twisted agenda. As the multiverse continued to unravel, Omega Squad found themselves at the center of a catastrophic collision between dimensions. The soldiers had no choice but to confront their greatest fear. If they couldn't close the rift, the very fabric of reality would collapse, dragging every version of Earth into a single, chaotic existence. Time, space, and identity were no longer certain, and only one thing was clear: the war had become far more dangerous than anyone could have ever imagined. The chaos reached its peak as the rift continued to tear at the seams of reality, distorting time, space, and the very essence of existence. Omega Squad found themselves trapped in a fractured world, where multiple versions of Earth and Spider-Man collided with no regard for the consequences. Buildings flickered between timelines, and people they had known suddenly appeared as strangers or enemies. Everything was unraveling, and if they didn't act quickly, the multiverse would collapse, taking their world with it. Major Carter and his team stood before the dimensional rift device, the key to either saving or destroying everything. They had fought their way through endless dangers, discovering not only the truth behind Spider-Man's mask but also the horrific power of the Syndicate. This shadow organization had orchestrated the multiversal crisis, knowing that if they could fracture reality, they could seize control over all of existence. The Syndicate had one goal: to reshape the multiverse in their image, where they controlled every version of Earth and every hero. But now, the soldiers faced their final choice. The rift was unstable, and if it was closed, all the alternate versions of Spider-Man would be pulled back into their own realities, and time would return to its natural flow. But there was a catch. Closing the rift would erase the memories of all the versions of Spider-Man that had crossed into their world. It would also erase every memory Omega Squad had of the war they'd fought, returning them to a life where the mask had never been found, and the timeline remained intact. Carter knew that if they closed the rift, they would erase the existence of Spider-Man from their world. Peter Parker would never have been born, and Spider-Man would remain a mere myth. But if they chose to keep the rift open, the consequences were far worse. The multiverse would collapse, and every reality would merge into one chaotic, unrecognizable world, ruled by the Syndicate and their version of order. As the team gathered around the rift, each soldier grappled with a moral dilemma. For some, it meant sacrificing their memories and a chance to restore normalcy to their lives. For others, it was the painful realization that the world they fought for would never be the same again. Carter, who had led his team through this chaos, knew that the right decision was to close the rift, no matter the personal cost. Omega Squad had given everything to stop the Syndicate, and they couldn't let the multiverse descend into chaos. They had to save their world, even if it meant losing everything they had fought for. In the final heart-wrenching moment, Major Carter made the choice. He initiated the shutdown sequence, and the rift began to close. The alternate versions of Spider-Man vanished, leaving behind only the echoes of their existence. As the rift collapsed, Omega Squad felt the weight of their sacrifice. The world around them returned to normal, but their memories, of Spider-Man, of Peter Parker, of the war they had fought, faded away. The soldiers stood in a world they no longer recognized, with no memory of the hero who had shaped their lives. The mask was gone, and with it, the last trace of Spider-Man's legacy in their reality. But Major Carter knew one thing. Even without memories of the battle they fought, the world was safe, for now. In the end, the true cost of saving reality was the loss of everything they held dear. And as they walked away, they realized that some heroes, like Spider-Man, are not just defined by their powers, but by the choices they make, even when no one remembers their name.